The Sherlock Holmes Advent Calendar. An Odyssey Through Jerusalem by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin. Narrated by Peter Silverleaf. 11. The House of Russia. The Armenian people, who had a rich tradition, had a rather difficult history of foreign powers occupying their country. Ancient Persians and Hellenes, Romans and Parthians, Seljuks, Kurds and Mongols, European Crusaders, and finally the Ottomans had ensured centuries of foreign rule with only few interruptions. However, the Armenian kingdom from the ancient world is considered the first empire in the world to adopt Christianity as a state religion. This, the recent Ottoman repression, and the fact that the previously Persian-controlled part of Armenia had been part of the Russian Tsarist Empire for 70 years now, had led to the Armenians not unjustifiably regarding Russia as their protecting power. In cross-church cooperation, the Armenian Apostolic Church was in good agreement with both the Pope and the most holy ruling synod of Russia. In this respect, Salah's claim that one had to look for the Tsar's secret scouts in Jerusalem in the Armenian community seemed quite obvious. Surprisingly, however, our path did not lead us to the Armenian quarter of the old city, but again to the Muslim one. For a decade and a half, the Armenian Catholic Church of Our Lady of Sorrows was located here. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service is based in an Armenian church? I asked when we arrived in front of the Neo-Byzantine-style building. Not really, Salah replied, but if you want to talk to the Okhrana, then you have to come here. There they will establish a contact if we are found worthy of an audience, that is, but it should not be a problem, because of course I am no stranger around these quarters. We walked up a few steps of the portal and stepped through the open gate. The interior of the church was empty except for a priest, who was probably busy preparing for a mass at the front of the altar. When he saw us, he came up to us, and in fact he seemed to be acquainted with our Palestinian companion. The two whispered briefly, and then we were led into a side aisle where there was a staircase which led down to the crypt, in a sense the actual sanctuary of this church site. There we waited while the Armenian priest left us again. They will send us a Russian representative, Salah explained. It will only take a few minutes. In the meantime, I would like to show you something that is certainly of interest for you as Christians. He walked towards a cordoned-off area of the crypt, where the floor was shining and had a mark drawn on it. On closer inspection, it turned out to be a mosaic which had difficult-to-read lines in the centre. "What is that?" I asked, as I couldn't see the slightest thing. "These are the amazingly well-preserved footprints of the Virgin Mary," Salah explained a little flippantly. "She fainted at this point when her son was escorted past her to the crucifixion. Obviously, you need to study your scriptures more closely, Dr. Watson." The slightly mocking lecture did not stop me from understanding that this was a presumed station of the Via Dolorosa, although it actually remained not dignified enough in these shortened renditions. I caught myself reciting the Hail Mary in my mind, which had lately regained importance in the Anglican Church. However, my brief moment of pause came to an abrupt end when Holmes put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You can worship the imprint of the sacred sandal later. Perhaps we should briefly agree on what our plan is when we face the Russian representative." "A plan?" Salah repeated. "There is no plan, only the truth. It will be best if we simply confront our counterpart with our findings and then improvise." Holmes nodded to my amazement. "You mean we observe the reaction and draw our analytical conclusions from undertones and nuances, from their facial expressions and their body language?" For a second, confusion crossed Salah's face, then he replied, "Certainly, exactly that." The next moment we heard footsteps coming down from the stairs, and when we saw who was walking down, at least I was amazed. Natalie, the French soprano I had met on the Orient Express, looked right at us. A very strange coincidence which I could hardly explain to myself, but of course there are no such coincidences. "Dobry den," Natalie said when she arrived down at the crypt. "Natalie," I shouted, still deeply surprised, "what are you doing here?" "You already know the lady?" asked Salah in my direction. "But of course. I stuttered. "From the Orient Express. A fellow traveller from Paris who wanted to take part in the staging of a Mozart opera as a singer in Constantinople." Holmes looked at me a little pitifully and explained, "My dear Watson, this woman is neither from Paris nor by profession an opera singer. Did you really believe that? The abduction from the Seraglio would be performed in the palace complex of the Ottoman Sultan, which may be perceived as offensive in the Orient? That was a lie, of course, but one with a remarkable sense of humour. Or did meeting her unexpectedly again at the bar of the Pera Palace Hotel, didn't that make you suspicious? This was all part of the camouflage and mission of Mademoiselle Nathalie, who in her actual Russian homeland probably listens more to the name of Natasha." I was totally flabbergasted. "But no," I stammered, "that can't be. Natalie, tell my friend he's wrong." "I am sorry, Dr. Watson," replied the young woman, who had shed her French accent in favour of a Russian one. "Mr. Holmes' remarks are correct. I work for the Tsarist Foreign Intelligence. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here right now." The whole essence of Natalie had changed. The cheerful lightness of the French artiste had given way to the cool, calculating nature of a resolute Russian. The girl I had met had disappeared, or rather, she had never existed. I turned to my friend and asked insistently, "How long have you known this? And more importantly, when did you plan to let me in on this?" Holmes hesitated briefly, then replied, "I had hoped that this would not be necessary. After all, you seem to get along well with the lady. Of course, I immediately recognized that her camouflage was amusing but implausible and, from my point of view, too sloppy. I had, of course, seen through her disguise at our first meeting in the saloon cart of the Orient Express. That's why I immediately sent the lady to you." "Thank you very much too, Holmes." I sighed, and shook my head in disappointment at my own carelessness and credulity, and then turned to Natalie again. "So you were ordered to spy on Holmes and me?" "Not at all," the Russian agent disagreed. "The fact that I was transferred from Paris to Palestine has nothing to do with you. However, that doesn't mean we didn't have you both in mind. However, I was told to observe another colleague." "Mr. Oberlich, I suppose," Holmes added. "For an alleged mathematician, his knowledge of Lie groups was downright shameful." Natalie nodded appreciatively to my friend, to confirm the suspicion. Now Salah interfered again in the somewhat strange conversation. "Lovely," he said. "Everyone knows each other. Everyone knows everything. This is a good basis for a fruitful exchange." "I'm afraid our interests diverge a little," Natalie replied. "Our governments are enemies." The Palestinian made a defensive hand movement. "Oh, that may be," he admitted, "but the dominance in the Black Sea or the Southern Caucasus does not affect me at the moment. And in order to negotiate the spheres of influence in the Balkans, we lack the Austrian delegate. Leaving that aside, let's focus on Jerusalem." "For all I care," the Russian replied after short consideration, "as long as no state secrets are concerned, how can we help you?" Now Holmes took over the conversation again. "You know without a doubt that an underground organization is at work here which carries out attacks on Ottoman institutions?" "Of course," said Natalie, a little arrogant. "We also note that the Ottomans are not in a position to put a stop to this group. In Russia, such people have been transported to Siberia long ago. For us, resistance is futile." Salah did not want to take that. "You will see who will be the last man standing. With your repressive methods, you will provoke a revolution in Russia faster than you would like. I would bet my home that the Tsar will be overthrown sooner than the Sultan." "Let's agree that it should be a close race," Holmes interjected, thus rescuing the situation with a joke which could also have a certain truthfulness. "Mademoiselle Natalie, it goes without saying that people in St. Petersburg have an interest in destabilizing Ottoman rule. The only question is how actively this goal is pursued. I am certainly not wrong to say that Armenians, Greeks, and South Slavic confederates are happy to help in this regard. But what about the Palestinians?" Natalie replied without hesitation. "I guarantee you that I am only in Jerusalem for a passive mission. There are currently no active Russian operations in Palestine." "I understand," Holmes said, approaching the Russian agent. "But how do you explain this?" With these words he handed her the found stick of dynamite, which he had quickly pulled out from his coat pocket. "What is that supposed to be?" asked Natalie, unimpressed, as she held the item in her hands. Holmes looked at her face forcefully and declared, "This is the explosive used in the attacks here in Jerusalem. As you can see, it was made in Russia." The young woman looked at the stick of dynamite from all sides, and then shook her head and stated, "A fake. We have nothing to do with that. There is even a misprint. Whoever wants to blame the Russian Empire for a series of attacks should probably first optimize his Russian language skills. You too, by the way, Mr. Holmes. I'm a little disappointed that you didn't notice the mistake. Maybe you would like to pick up Pushkin again in the original version." Holmes took back the stick of dynamite and read the lettering again. "Mea culpa," he quickly admitted. "Once I'm back in London, I'll follow your advice." Salah seemed somewhat unhappy. "I should have known," he noted. "The simple solutions always turn out to be dead ends." "The Russian origin of the explosive may have been an aberration, but by no means a dead end," Holmes corrected. "We have gained a realization for our investigations. The perpetrators are interested in dragging Russia into the matter. Presumably, the incorrectly printed dynamite rod was even deliberately left behind so that it could be found and become the basis of a false track. I have to say, that was very smart. The question remaining is, who would have an interest in driving the Ottomans and Russians back into a direct conflict, perhaps even a military one?" "That's what we want to know as well," Natalie added, "and we're going to investigate it. If you would therefore please hand over our evidence to me again." "Actually, it's our evidence," Holmes disagreed. But the Russian insisted. "Not any more." My friend hesitated for a few more seconds, and then he answered her request by handing over the dynamite. "Spasibo," Natalie said. "Whoever is responsible will pay." Salah demonstratively scratched his head and asked, "Does this mean that we are now something like partners?" "I wouldn't go that far," the Russian agent replied. "Let's say that there is a temporary partial overlap of interests. We stay in touch." With that, the young woman disappeared, leaving us with even more questions in the crypt of Our Lady's Sorrows.